I'm not going to do the intros. I'm going to have our distinguished panelists do their own introductions. We're going to start with Ofelia showing her documentary film, and then bringing our panelists together to talk about the meaningfulness of this whole project and how it connects both to our community and the larger global picture. So it's an exciting possibility to have Jahoda, our faculty from the Studio Arts, Mario Ontiveros from Art History, Ignacio, the initiator of the Border Crossed Us, and Ofelia Rivas, who's come from Arizona to bring her perspective to the whole project. So Ofelia, you're on first, I believe.
I think we're going to do it.
Oh, okay, Catherine, all right, thank you.
Is this on from the beginning? Yeah, the lights will be great. So hi, my name is Catherine Ignacio, and I'm representing the Institute for Infinitely Small Things. We're a diverse sort of arts, sort of performance, sort of political organization, sort of based in Boston, among other things. So how many of you have been to the project site already, just to get a show of hands? Okay, so a lot of what I'm going to show is documentation of what's there, so I'll continue to show it because not everybody has been there. So I was just going to say a couple of words about the project and how it came about, and then Ophelia's going to show a little bit about the actual border, the border that this project came about. So just a little background on myself and the Institute. The past 5 or 6 years of our research and work has been in interrogating this kind of new emotional tenor, or the kind of new geography of fear and insecurity that we face now in the United States post 9/11. And so I'm not going to actually talk about these projects, but we've done various kinds of projects. Looking at
I wanted to measure our total.
Trying to do things like measure fear in public spaces. So for me, I've seen the ways in which our public spaces have been transformed, and in which we are being called upon as citizens to act and behave in what I would consider new ways in public spaces. So we're called on to watch out for suspicious packages, to police those around us, to be suspicious, all of which I think lead to what I would call an increasing climate of fear, mistrust, intolerance, and I think pose very literally these kind of threats to a democracy, if we might purport to be that. And so these are some other pieces about this was a piece about the evacuation routes in Boston. And so this is how I came to this project and to this fence. In particular, this is the fence that Ofelia will talk about because it's the fence that's in her backyard. But I was interested in the same way that I was interested in this previous project in evacuation route signs that were going up in my neighborhood, telling us that, oh, well, we need to evacuate our city now. It's like, well, why do we need to evacuate? What's happening? What's coming along here? So there's these sort of visible manifestations of how we're vulnerable in our spaces. There's no more visible manifestation of fear and insecurity than the U.S.-Mexico border fence brought about, not all of it, but the most recent additions to it brought about by the Secure Fence Act in 2006 that Bush signed into law. And in particular, my sister lives down in Tucson, and she's the one who made me aware of the fact that there was a fence erected by Homeland Security that actually was cutting through a community's land. And so, there's the one thing of like having the border fence is already this kind of insane, this insane gesture to build something across thousands of miles of land. But then the fact that there was a fence cutting through somebody's home was incredible. It was just incredible to me. only really able to find one map, but this is the map of traditional O'odham lands. You can see that O'odham lands are extending on both sides of the U.S.-Mexican border. The Gadsden Purchase is what drew the current international border. And James Gadsden did not go to the O'odham and ask them about whether they minded. And so for me, encountering this border, Ofelia was kind enough last year to take me to the border. That's my sister and my son, actually. And encountering this material reality of this fence, that your body matches up against this fence. It's just marching through the desert, starts to go up the hill and up the mountains, and then stretches on the other side as far as the eye can see. It's this unimaginable act in a desert. And so here's Ofelia with the two international boundary markers. So when the UMass Amherst invited me to propose a project for the public spaces here, this fence was what I was really interested in at the time, because it's just such, again, there's a way in which it doesn't work, right? It doesn't actually, you may have different opinions about immigration, but the fence itself is pretty widely acknowledged not to work. So there's this way in which it becomes this kind of symbolic, poetic gesture of division, of like, where do we end and where do they begin? And so it was this very powerful, I read it as this aesthetic gesture of the U.S. military in so many ways. And so I wanted to sort of bring that experience here in some way. And so that was the idea, was to try to, in a way, reenact this fence, and to try to take a community such as UMass Amherst and divide that in two. And as an experiment, as a provocation, as a way of seeing, well, what happens? What happens when you divide a community that is not meant to be divided? And so that was the original idea, and it has gone through various kinds of permutations as it went through the Public Art Committee here. But we were, in fact, able to realize the project, and this is its current incarnation. I apologize, the documentation is from my iPhone camera, so this is not like the most professional documentation. But what we have realized is a project that through 400 feet of photo mesh banner material, we took a panoramic image that I shot down on that border in Ophelia's backyard. And we have mounted that onto this chain link fence. The idea behind this is that it's sort of using a construction site metaphor. So that it's the material that is usually mounted on chain link fences throughout construction sites to sort of advertise what's coming. Like, here's your future, right? And so in this case, each section of fence is enclosing about a 3-foot wide distance where a fence might potentially be built. And it stretches 200 feet across this main north-south pedestrian walkway here on campus. And there are openings in it, but from afar, it begins to be read as one long, continuous piece. So there's this sort of transplantation of the fence, or this future fence, coming to the site here. You can see it. Sorry, this is my coat, and I'll get to this in a second. It's kind of part of the project, actually. And so here you can see it's a very busy section of the campus. So we're now squeezing people. We weren't able to build it so it would entirely block people from walking, but we're squeezing people into these narrow openings. Some more shots. Again, these are iPhone documentation. I wanted there to be some reference to this, again, the material realities. We're not just looking at photos. So here we have built a 2-scale replica of the fence posts. So these are, there are just 2 of these, but they're right in the middle of the bike path, and they're designed to hopefully provoke some kind of seed of doubt in someone's head, like, oh, like they've already installed part of this, or what's happening here? Like, this is not just some mural up on a fence. What's going on? So the fence sort of continues with these real ones here in the middle of the bike path. repurposed this, what is usually a map kiosk, and in a way I'm thinking about this as the metaphorical border checkpoint. And so each day, this border checkpoint is going to be asking people a different question as they cross the border. So they're questions that are mostly typical of what you might hear as you cross the border. So today's question is, where are you going? Another question might be, where did you come from? Other questions get more accusatory or suspicious, like, what are you hiding? Why are you here? So they're questions that are, what color are you? Again, color, I think Ofelia will probably talk about this, but color and race and ethnicity are a very important part of the border politics. And so people are asked to text their responses to this phone number, which goes to the phone in my code, which is why it's making noise. And then those get then posted also to the project website. And so it's another way that we're sort of logging feedback from people about the project. Oh, and I should say too, there will be days where the signs are in Spanish, and there will be days where the signs are in Oto as well. And then finally, the last part of the project is this is a sound piece that comes from this circular vent in the ground. It's a large vent. It's about 12 feet in diameter. It's coming from the parking garage. There's actually a large fan in there. We're not sure if it works. And Facilities wasn't sure if it works either. And I'm just going to show you a quick. Hear the sound. And the sound really, I felt like the sound was important because when I originally, there it comes again. This is great, we're getting lots of feedback. Let's see how I can capsize. Okay. Turn this up a little bit. The sound came about because of conversations with Ofelia actually, where she told me about the sounds as they were constructing this fence. So I mean, you can see these are steel posts. They have concrete inside of them. They're sunk deep into the ground. It's a vehicle barrier. It's meant to stop vehicles from driving across. So to get these things into the hard earth, you can imagine the machinery and the lights. I think the construction went up 24 hours a day, right? So you can imagine the industrial sort of manpower that was needed to make this happen at such these regularized intervals across the landscape. And so the sound that comes from that vent is a kind of trying to recreate that those construction sounds in a particular way. I mean, it's composed of field recordings that Ofelia took from helicopters flying over the border, mixed in with other construction sounds. And then after that sort of track, there's then a counterpoint where Ofelia does a blessing and sings a song called the Eagle Song. So I think this one is, the video here is starting with the Eagle Song. So hopefully you can. And again, this is with my iPhone, so it's not the greatest. but then it also is really very literally dividing this campus into two, and so to see what kinds of conversations are being provoked. And so a really big portion of this project as well are things that you can't see and hear on the site. They're the events that we organize as part of it. So they're bringing Ofelia and Flora from the reservation to talk about the experiences. We've also been working with faculty here to give assignments to their students about thinking about borders on the UMass Amherst campus. And then we've partnered with the anthropology department to do some of the other programming and integrate with their annual Native Studies certificate program events, such as their annual powwow and symposium. And so a lot of the way that this is being inserted into the campus also has to do with these ways that it's filtering out through these events. So it's a very real part of the design as well. And so, and I just wanted to say one thing which is kind of interesting, which is I've been in touch with an activist down on the University of Arizona campus, and the University of Arizona students recently mounted a really large mock border wall on their campus, and then other campuses around the country have started to get inspired by this idea of mounting mock borders. And the mock border at the University of Arizona campus talks about other walls as well, so the Israel-Palestine separation wall, and other kinds of struggles. And so there's one at Brown that's going up, and there's another one, there's like 2 other ones that are going up. And so together, the 5 of us have actually put out a joint press release. And the students down in Arizona actually got a letter from Desmond Tutu for supporting the project. But we put out a press release, and the press release is sort of calling for a national mock border movement. So it's kind of an interesting way in which this project is kind of having this other life. The other projects are not really using the language of art necessarily, but I mean they're an interesting way to join forces for this project. So with that, I will turn it over to Ofelia, and here to the DVD. And she said the last 10 minutes. From Ofelia, maybe. So, is there any particular part, maybe like around here?
Yeah, but just start. It's actually quite a bit.
Well, as an agreement, there's 2 ports of entry for people in the nation. And with Border Patrol is there 24 hours a day, you can expect people coming through those gates. And at this point, there are vehicles and they're inspected to make sure there's no weapons or drugs or anything, and that they are in fact tribal members.
If we walk out of our door, we need some kind of document to prove who we are, that we're not terrorists in our own lands coming across our own lands, which happens to have an international border dividing our lands.
every agent that enters on duty in an area that covers the tunnel elimination, they receive cultural training on traditions and the culture as a whole. So some people are from Minnesota, some people are from New York, they've never been or have had contact with anybody in the nation. So yeah, they get cultural training and they're made aware.
They said that all people, whether they're living in the United States or in Mexico, we're all Tohono Nation members, and that they're allowed to remain on their lands and allowed to have the freedom to come and recome on their traditional route. I don't have a birth record. I'm in my 50s, and I was born right here at my mother's village. People older than me don't have documents. And these are the people that are the ceremony leaders, that are the traditional leaders that have the most difficult time crossing this border.
We're trying to better secure the border in between the ports of entry.
A document came out and said they were building a wall that's very similar to the Berlin Wall, and a road along the border. That's in my yard. That will be in my yard if that happened. We fought against that, as traditional often, but we lost. We completely lost because they closed our gates to ceremony.
We have villages across the nation, and we have roads that are major routes of egress, and that's why we have vehicle barriers in this area. We've had fences since 1924, and it's just a different type, and what helped us the most, we deploy what we needed the most.
Not until 9/11 it became official. They are officially here on the land. I was here when they arrived and started making the wall. I couldn't sleep at night because they would work at night. Then you hear all the scraping and the rocks being crushed, and it sounded like screaming to me, and I would sit all night listening to the screaming. It's like Mother Earth screaming because they're putting these metal things in her, and we don't know how we can pull them out, I don't know if we'll ever be able to take those metal things out of her. But they're there. They put them in concrete, filled up metal cylinders with concrete, and told us that we are now in 2 different countries as all people. People are afraid to use the word militarization. But I understand that word completely because it meant that all rights that you have, if you consider yourself a U.S. citizen, and then you happen to be an indigenous U.S. citizen or an awesome U.S. citizen, you're stripped of all your rights. You have no rights. You are considered a suspect and that you are illegally here, and you have entered into the U.S. territory without documentation. So we are immediately harassed and interrogated. And it's a frightful thing for the elders when they don't speak English and they don't understand what they're being asked to produce some kind of document saying that you are a U.S. citizen.
I was coming home from a ceremony and the border patrol stopped us. We were going to clean a Tucson, my daughter works there. And they asked me to prove whether I was a U.S. citizen or Mexican citizen. And I said, well, I'm all coming from my lands. I should ask who you are, where you come from. So he pulled his weapon out of his holster and put his pistol to my head and said, you say you're a U.S. citizen or a Mexican citizen. And I said, I'm an Alta. And my daughter cried, my grandson was crying. But that's a daily occurrence. That's what happens. They came into my friend's house who just had a baby, a little infant, and she was on a mat on the floor nursing her baby at 4:45 in the morning. They charged in all in riot gear. And they said they were looking for drugs and they were looking for undocumented people. But one of the men came and just got his flashlight and was shining their light at my friend's breast while she was feeding her baby. That is a violation of our rights as Alta people. This United States, they say we have all these rights, we have the freedom and all these kind of things. But being a religious person, that doesn't apply to me. Otherwise, these things will occur to us as indigenous people, as an Alta.
It takes a greater government than the United States government to point out that it's a definite human rights violation, that it's destroying our culture, that it's unconscionable for people to make laws and not consider the people of the land.
Kiai yang terpaksa cie main sisa pentas cie kamu cie mau macam kita mah kayak kita mahas cie kudo mata si mama bo ori tak coba cie macam cuma si cuma macam mata pasal cie mau kudo kita cuma tu kita mau hai itu dia lagi. My name is Ofelia Rivas, but also go by Ofelia, my name, and I just said that I'm really happy to see everybody, and that this kind of border and that we're talking about this division of our traditional lands, that it's happening all over the world globally, and what are we going to do about it as a society, as a human beings, that we have to live in this kind of conditions. And we know about all the other borders that's around the world that it's impacting lives and changing cultures and altering our way of life. But this is happening here in the United States. It's here in the United States that it's happening, and that people are not aware of it. The media, is all owned by the corporations, and they're not going to talk about human violations that's occurring on our lands by the United States government. It's the United States government that brought the Homeland Security into our lands and militarized our lands. We cannot step out of our yards without interrogation, without harassment, without showing a piece of document that proves that you have the right to be in your own homelands. That is what's impacting our way of life. It's completely altered our way of life, because our vast homeland existed before Mexico, and before the United States. And it's divided into now 2 countries that we have to align ourselves with either country, but yet we're a sovereign nation within the United States. But that sovereignty, that word sovereignty is only just a word on a piece of paper. When you take a look at the history of the United States, when 9/11 happened, they said, oh, this is the first act of terrorism on this country and this land. But when you take a look at Indian history, Native American history, it happened when the first people landed very close here, and it started, and it destroyed cultures. It altered this whole land here in this hemisphere, and not only that, but other hemispheres, you know. And so it's just history of the United States that it continues to go forward with this kind of so-called democracy, you know. So I talk about, I'm a human rights activist, and I travel internationally on my tribal ID card and my prayer feather, because I feel that I have a right to talk about what's happening to our people. I have a right to talk in my language. I mean, the United States also introduced a law trying to regulate that you only can speak one language in this country. And yet I have my original language, and I will speak that original language and violate that law if it happens to be. And I will continue to cross that border without these proper documents, because I feel that I have a right to, and the traditional people we have a right to conduct our ceremonies. We have a right to visit our sacred places and do those ceremonies that we believe as a people since the beginning of this world that balances the whole universe in our ceremonies that we do. And it not just benefits us, it benefits the entire universe, and that we do have a right to do those ceremonies. So I want to speak from that voice, and I always say that this voice is from my ancestors and my elders that guide the work that I do. So thank you very much.
We'll bring the chairs forward and move the table and then
I was talking about the border as a metaphor, and this space or this place for passive or active engagement. And thinking about this piece on the campus, how does it come alive for us as a community? How do we engage with the piece in an active way? And how do we embody this piece by thinking about how borders affect, how we're affected by borders on a daily basis? How as we walk through this campus that we think of sort of theoretically as a neutral space, how in fact, where are the borders, you know, in terms of race, class, and gender, and et cetera, et cetera. And one of the things that we were in conversation about was, well, we put together a questionnaire and handed it out to a number of our students, and we got some really pretty amazing responses, and maybe Catherine wants to share. One thing I absolutely forgot to mention when I was talking too is the project website is actually a really integral part of the piece, and I didn't show because I didn't have internet access just at that moment, but it's the border crossed and then .us is it's basically the name of the project, but it's .us instead of .com. And so it's at that site, which is a blog. We're documenting sort of the process of creating it, but we're also documenting people's responses. So people are texting messages in response, and then students are actually doing assignments related to borders in various classes in different departments, and then we're posting those assignments. So it's the kind of an ongoing logging of people's responses and feedback. So one woman who completed this assignment, I was just going to read a little bit because her response was quite eloquent. So, as a woman of color on campus, the public spaces I feel comfortable on campus are limited to those to which I'm familiar with. This is because I know that when I enter those spaces, I will not be received in a hostile manner. I'm never sure how I will be received in places I am not familiar with. This is something that is often on my mind. I think at times I find that I am preparing myself to face the unexpected in many of the public spaces on campus. There are definitely places I do not feel welcome. One particular place is the W.H. Moore building? Whitmore building, which is where the administration is housed. I feel unwelcome here because of my identity as a working class woman of color and a graduate student who chooses to be active against the inequality on campus, often supported or swept under the rug by the administration. I also feel uncomfortable in buildings that house majors that are primarily comprised by white students. I believe that assumptions about me based on my appearance are made daily. I get this feeling from the types of looks I get from people who inhabit the spaces that I described as uncomfortable. When I interact with white men in positions of power, they often assume that I'm unaware and that I will just be compliant to whatever they tell me. When I challenge them, they are often surprised. At UMass, I am always crossing borders because of the composition of my identity. One border that I have difficulty with when crossing is the border of departments, in particular academic departments. Oftentimes, I choose to take classes in a department outside of my own. I am often unwelcome in the department I have chosen to take a class in. I feel like I have to prove to those who are already in the part of the department why I belong or am entitled to take a class in their discipline. I think for people of color on campus and other marginalized communities, this crossing of borders is very real and even a daily experience. So that's just one response. We've gotten many, many thoughtful responses that we've been logging at the website. In particular, it's sort of, again, this idea of like how can we relate and bring these experiences home to our personal, material, physical realities here. And you know, none of us who are not Oto, are going to entirely understand this fence and what it means for Ofelia. But we can be challenged to relate in our daily lives to that fence. And I think all of us, not just people of color or women or men,
Yeah, maybe we should just introduce ourselves, not just so that, because I don't know if I know everybody. course. I teach modern and contemporary art in the art history department. I work a lot with studio students, and my research focuses on activist art practices in the US since the 1960s, looking at the ethical dimensions of that work, issues around social obligation, political responsibility, and social belonging are issues that I focus on.
Catherine and Hazel. I'm Susan Jahoda, and I teach in the Department of Art. I teach courses in photography and visual culture.
I mean, I think one of the things, that this project casts in high relief is both that it is a literal fence and then also not a literal fence, that it brings a completely different landscape, and a landscape that we're not familiar with in terms of a sort of blockage, but then you could still pass through it. And the ability to pass through that obviously is an administrative issue, right? We can't just literally block. I mean, our hope at one point was that it would be more than an inconvenience, that it would literally block you. And because, not to sort of instrumentalize a border and not to, to not instrumentalize the actual material conditions around a border, but to really make us pause. And sometimes you have to pause. And I think that in many respects, the current version of this really does make us pause. And I think that that pause is important in the sense of we live in a global, transnational world that's sort of, I don't know, you have to just look at sort of capitalism and credit cards, and they all promise a sort of transnational flow of goods and commerce, but I think sometimes forget that those border points, those checkpoints, that those are actual physical barriers. And I thought that the film gave us such an example of the audacity, that's not even the right word, but the very fact that what you have to do in your daily life is to cross, like the square feet and miles that you have to do is more than an inconvenience and is more than a pause. I mean, and that's something I think that the work itself, rather than stopping on this campus, but to make you pause, to me, that little pause should extend exponentially to the material realities that that border poses in just a pause. And that's one of the strengths I thought that I was wondering if you could talk about sort of those pauses and what you, both in this project and in your larger work.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think part of the, because the piece, I think it's, because it's not in what's typically codified as an art space, there are certain ways that not being in an art space, you can really leverage that to create these moments. And I feel like these are the moments that that are the goal of the work. And I don't know that they always get created in everybody, probably not. There's lots of people that are just walking by and like, I need to go to class and whatever, there's something in my way, I don't care. But at the same time, I think that those folks who do encounter it, in a way it's to your advantage that it's not immediately read as art. It's not a painting that's on a gallery. We have a way that we know to respond to a painting in an art gallery. So we know that we stand a sort of certain distance back based on how big the painting is. We might go up close, we might look at some details or something like that. We might read the card that's next to the painting, and then we might move to the next one. And so that's our kind of coded way of looking at paintings. I have nothing against paintings at all, but seriously,
I'm for an object-less art history. So I want an art history without objects.
But so like when you're outside of that context, and so then you take the campus as a kind of like what can I do here? What behaviors do people typically engage in this particular environment, and how can I either disrupt them or provoke them or make them happen differently? Things can really open up, and I think those moments of pause are those moments where people ask, like, what is this? What am I encountering? Where you kind of have to look at something with really fresh eyes because you haven't yet said in your head, oh, this is art, you know, or oh, this is about this one particular thing. And so that's where I feel like too the project takes a different language than these other activist mock border projects as well, because in the same way that art gets read at art, it's really good. I'm glad that so many people, all of a sudden, all these people are texting. It's great. But the same way that art projects, you know, painting gets read as art in an art gallery, of course, like activist projects can often get read as activists. You're like, okay, those are the activists. Like, we'll put them over there. We get it. Okay, we don't want some more flyers or whatever. So I think there's a way in which those pauses of where people don't know what they're encountering, for me, are those really like pregnant moments of where like real transformation might be possible, you know, and like where you're open to something new. There's something about like how like in our brains we actually create more neural pathways if we do things differently. So even if you just like take a different route to work one day or something, you're actually like creating new neural pathways. And so in that same sense, it's like that encounter with something new, something unrecognizable. I think even that one little moment of pause, and then maybe they find out later, and they're like, oh, okay, blah, we can categorize it now. But I think there's something really rich in there that might really stick with people. And I guess what I try to do in all of the projects too is create an experience for the body. So an experience that is for a body to encounter. And so for me, the experience of encountering that fence with my body was so powerful and transformative. So as to, in a way, sort of reenact that. And so it's a fictionalized artifice. I mean, it's an artificial reenactment of that border, but it's a kind of a way of putting your bodies in a position to cross a border here on this campus.
So it functions to initially destabilize sense of space, and then would this be a kind of a contradictory second piece, or that it would help to confirm a sense of place, to create a shared sense of common space, I mean, afterwards? I'm just thinking about once we identify that the space needs to be destabilized, that we need to pay attention, and then there's awareness, but then what?
Right.
You know, so that's like that next active place, because we often look at work and we feel a sense of empathy, but we don't know how to act. Like, how do you change as audience, as people that are participating, if we're thinking about this project as social practice? How do we engage as viewers to then, you know, to act?
I know. I think that's a wonderful question, and I did this event at one point about art and activism, and this question was asked basically, how do you move an audience from awareness to engagement?
Right.
Which I think, and I always, when I do artist talks, I end with that slide, but I have to tell you that I don't know the answer. And so I don't know if Ofelia maybe has some ideas actually about, because that's a question for me as an artist too, is like you can create these moments, and I feel like there's something so rich in these transformative moments, but even for myself, I don't know what the next step would be necessarily. So I don't know if you have ideas. Ofelia is also an artist, by the way, so.
I want to hear some questions from the audience.
If I may, something locally that's sort of the next step. I think with physical distance from the border, it's easy to forget what it's like, but in this area we have police cars that are enforcing border or immigration policy. It's sort of being roving, border patrol, roving military. And so there's a movement from the top down, who knows, Department of Homeland Security, to have local police report immigration status and check things. But there's also movements from the ground up of having local police not try to enforce federal policy. And so those kinds of ordinances around local police are happening in this area. There's one up for voting in the next couple months in Northampton.
Can you
And so,
speak up a little bit?
Yeah.
Because it's very difficult to hear.
oh wow, there's so many people here. ordinances going, organizers working on ordinances to have local police not cooperate with federal immigration policy, which makes a big difference. Because if you're a witness to a crime, but you have a mixed documentation status, you may not feel comfortable talking to the police. You may not feel comfortable reporting domestic violence or workplace abuses and things like that. So it matters for our communities. And the Department of Homeland Security policy is secure communities, but it's destabilizing, it's disrupting, it's policing our communities. So there are things locally.
That's really interesting.
And it's slow and steady, and immigration is a hot topic and a button issue for too many elections, but it's slow and steady.
That's really interesting.
I want to just ask about how the dialogue started, because that's one of the key things about one of the steps for engagement, often for us, is the sense we often forget that to not act is also an action, and that you're responsible for that inaction. And you're also responsible, and this is what makes it difficult, is you're also responsible for the unintended consequences of your action, which is what makes us so much easier to turn on television and to consume than it does to actually deal with that complexity. And I'm just curious how that started, because as artists or cultural practitioners, writers, poets, when we start to open up beyond the studio and really, as Susan said, engage with the social practice, how does this conversation start? I mean, how does that happen?
Well, for us, it was through my sister and her fiance in Tucson. My sister, knowing some of the previous work that I had done, she emailed me an article I've written in the New York Times about the Oath of Reservation. And I had been planning already a trip out to Tucson just to visit with her and the fiance. And Ofelia knew Lenny, her fiance, through, I don't even know how you guys knew each other.
Driver.
Okay. Okay. Driver collective. And so I asked my sister, like, well, do you guys know anybody who's on the reservation who I could talk with? And they put me in touch with Ofelia, and then Ofelia really graciously.
And in 2003, we were already submitting documents to what became the Homeland Security that wanted to build a wall, you know, like the Berlin Wall. And so I was really actively in the media. That was my charge from the community to go out there, because I have this mouth that keeps on going. And so, you know, just by kind of like appointment, you say, okay, you're out there, you're going to go and tell the people what's happening. And at that time, they were literally trying to run us off the road, as there was one traditional route that was open, and we were going back and forth because my father's community is 15 miles south of that border, and we were transporting water because their well got contaminated. So we were always, you know, the Border Patrol was always harassing us. And so the elders said, you need to go out there and tell the world what's happening to us. So that became kind of like what I started doing. I went everywhere to wherever I could. And one of the things that was, even though there was a lot of immigration rights, active work organizations in Tucson, Don't Know the Nation was a completely new, different thing. People live in Tucson didn't know who the people were in the Don't Know the Nation, which is just 75 miles away. Everybody lives in their own little bubble, and there is another border, you know, that you have to say, hey, you know, we're the original people of the land, and this is what's happening to us. But it was the young people that listened to me first. And it happened to be the really radical young people that, like, Earth First people were the first ones that stepped up and helped me create this organization called All the Voice Against the Wall. And All the Voice Against the Wall, through a lot of help, created a web page and just created a lot of network contacts. And that's how we came to be that also I do artwork and do a lot of photography, that we came to this point where we're at. And to talk about this border or this wall, sometimes we have to break those walls that we live in within ourselves. I mean, that's what I had to do because, believe it or not, I'm really shy and don't speak in public, didn't like to speak in public, and I had to break those walls so I can go out and tell the people. And everybody always said, but you speak English so well. But I really think in my language first before I can say what we want to say. So these pictures are on both sides of these, these pictures that are coming around are some of my pictures that I've taken at home that are what's happening to our people.
Did the film have some of your photos?
No, that was all Jason's. So I meet people like Jason who produced the video, and then I meet Jeff, and everybody says, what's with this guy with all the J names? But they helped me. One did the webpage, the other one did the video, and just helped me get to places as well. Yeah.
I have a question, Ofelia. There are, I'm sure, many villages. Are you the only spokesperson for your tribe? And how do they feel towards you? And how do they feel about themselves of the situation? Because you are, I'm sure, one of the few.
Can I add a question to that? Because one question I was asked when I went to speak at the anthropology department was, how does the Tohono O'odham Nation's government feel about this project? And I was like, well, I don't know, because we haven't asked them about it. So I don't know what you think they would feel about it if they knew about it. So then
well, the Tohono O'odham Nation really forced by the federal government to create a government that mimics the federal government. So it's not a traditional form of government. So there is a division that happens in a lot of reservations, a lot of tribes that have a traditional form of government and a federally kind of recognized form of government. And no, they're not happy with me a lot of times. And there's a lot of problems. They have accepted Homeland Security funds, they have accepted Homeland Security weapons, and they have a tank at their administration building. So we're, All the Voice Against the Wall is led by elders and ceremony people, and the rest of the workers are youth scattered throughout, not just on the reservation, but outside the reservation. So it's a group that that has formed to work together about this issue. And 2006, the Tohono O'odham Nation actually tried to introduce legislation into their council to banish me from the nation for insubordination, because I wrote a lot of pieces to the United Nations. I went and lodged a complaint about our way of life, that it was being altered and destroyed, and that it's actually very militarized, and we're in a crisis state as it was, because there was so much abuse. The abuse has changed to not so much abuse, but very severe abuse. Before, they could just hit you with the batons and hold you at gunpoint and beat you up. Now, they can really try to disable you. I was telling a story about the young person with his family that was told that the Border Patrol told them, we are the authority, you have to do what we're telling you to do. So he said, I've crossed this border several times, all my life I've crossed this border. So in front of his wife and his family, they choked him, they dragged him out of his vehicle. They would jump on the back of your neck right here with their knee full force. And in that case, they pulled the a man's arms back, and they tore the ligaments off his arm. And that's how the situation is now. I always thought, well, if an Alton died on the reservation, surely there would be an uprising of, not only the Alton, but the general public, and realize what's happening here. Well, a young man, an 18-year-old man, Bennett Patricio, was walking on an isolated road going home, and the Border Patrol ran over him. 2 trucks ran over him. He was flattened like a cardboard. His mother wasn't able to identify him, and they swept it under the rug. They went to federal court. The Border Patrols were found not negligent, not guilty. The Ninth Circuit Court case was kind of abandoned because the family ran out of funds. But at the same time, the Border Patrol was trying to offer this family an enormous amount of money to settle outside of court, which the mother said, no, I want justice for my son, which never happened because they ran out of funding to pursue the case. So, those kind of things that don't get to the general media or the general public, to understand, what's happening to us. So I can talk all day about what's happening. Yes?
I had a question for you, which is, I've spent a little bit of time now. I'm working on the border as like providing emergency medical care to people who cross the border. I've never gone far west enough actually to be on, although all the land is stolen land, it's all occupied. But I've never been on what's basically like the reservation. And I was wondering what your experiences are like of migrants who cross the border through, or try to cross the border through foreign land.
Yes. Well, there's I only have the statistics from maybe about 4 years ago, where there was over 200 people that died within a certain seasonal period, just on the reservation. So there's a map, if you can imagine a map of the reservation, and literally the whole land is dotted with these little red dots depicting how many people have died on that land. The Border Patrol have criminalized us to be Samaritans. We can't help them. If we give them water, we're aiding and abetting. If we have them come into our homes, we have undocumented people in our homes, and we can be arrested for harboring undocumented people or transporting I've been also threatened by that same thing, that for giving them water. So there's a huge problem about that. And not to say that the Tohono O'odham experienced the same thing. 2 weeks ago, I documented 3 O'odham all young people that were all arrested, detained, deported into Mexico, and banned for 5 years from their own lands. So they have to stay in Mexico, where some of their family lives, and the other part of their family lives in the United States. So they can never see their family members unless they sneak across that border and not be caught, because they're banned for 5 years. And if they do enter within those 5 years, then they're criminals, and then they can be held in detention for longer periods of time. Yes?
I have a question for you. How is your relationship with the Mexican government as a flag? I mean, because we can focus obviously on this side, but I also wonder what your relationship is as a tribe with the Mexican government.
In the 1600s, the Mexican government sent the powerful general to come and wipe out the O'odham, because we burned down all the missions and because they built churches along one of our routes, you know. So, yeah, that is not a good thing. A good relationship. But right now, all indigenous peoples are not recognized and not.
By either nation?
No, you're asking if Mexico, relationship with Mexico, that's what you asked. So, there are no reservations in Mexico. But now, as of last year, they're starting to do the same thing that they did in the United States. They're relocating different nations because they have to find gold on your land. Or maybe they want, you know, your tropical area and it's beautiful land, so they're relocating. What does that mean? They're removing people from their homelands and they're putting them in restricted areas and reservation lands. That's exactly what's happening in Mexico now. We're not specifically into like a reservations, little concentration camps like they have in the United States that you're restricted in, but you're just considered a Mexican citizen. And we used to have 49 villages on the southern side, which is now Mexico. Now there's only 9 existing villages and barely surviving.
That important note. Thank you. Thank you all for coming. And dialogue continues this week. So please join us at our other events. And anyone who hasn't been able to come to this event today, it's recorded. You're all on camera. So again, thank you. And thank you so much.